Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, August 19th, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Professor of History at Monash University in Australia, author of Red Meat Republic, A Hoof-to-Table History of How Beef Changed America, Joshua Specht, will be with us. Also on the program today, federal court allows the Trump ban on abortion referrals to go forward while lawsuits continue. Could mean loss of millions of dollars to women's health providers across the country. Rural areas particularly hit hard. Meanwhile, Trump's forced attendance rally backfires. 3 potential mass shootings foiled this weekend. Nice. Bernie releases a massive criminal justice proposal, and Joe Biden realizes his mouth is a liability. Hong Kong sees 1.7 million people, that's 1/4 of their population, march in the pouring rain this weekend in protest. New report, CEO pay has grown almost 1,000% in the past 30 years.
Doing a lot of good work.
Yours, I feel quite confident in saying, has not. Meanwhile, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse and 4 other Democratic senators declare war on the Supreme Court of the United States. And removing a stigma, Atlanta makes school lunch free to all students. Lastly, in a national survey of economists, 74% say a recession likely by late 2021. As data shows, the tax cut was indeed a total scam. And lastly, leaked Proud Boy chats show they were plotting violence. Surprise, surprise, surprise. All this and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, hope you had a good weekend. Followed all that stuff that happened in Portland this weekend via Twitter. Fortunately, not no significant violence of any sorts. The Proud Boys were severely outnumbered by anti-fascist, Antifa protesters, and somehow the Proud Boys were able to have a non-permitted march with protection from the cops, and the Antifa people not so much, but nevertheless, no major violence. Let's get into this, shall we, ladies and gentlemen? Just a reminder, couple of just house cleaning things. Next week, we're going to be on vacation. There will be all new recorded interviews, which you will enjoy. And if you want to get a brief fix on the news of the day, our AM Quickie is the best way to do this. It's sort of like my headlines that I read at the front, but it's a little bit more in-depth than a couple of stories and not quite as many stories. but you'll get a sense of where the news is without having to get too deep into it. Every day on the Majority Report feed, you simply go and subscribe to the Majority Report. You don't need the members feed or anything like that. Just go on to iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or your podcast app. Audio only. Go in, subscribe. It will come to you in the morning, hopefully by 9, often before then, but we try and get it out the door by 8:30 or so, but we'll see. I will still be doing it on vacation. So,
really?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
What about your co-host? Will she as well?
She will be too.
All right.
She is not on vacation, but I will be on vacation.
Yes. Heavy on the quotation.
There you
I
go.
would like you to take an actual vacation.
Yeah, well,
at
that's
some
pretty
point.
good. I mean, it doesn't take long to do, and so there may be screaming children in the background. We'll see.
That would be interesting acoustics.
Speaking of which, in studio today, we may have a guest. I've hired someone to do a little bit of organizing around the office, and her name is Mila Seder. She may actually hop on the microphones. Also, a reminder, if you want to become a member of this program, it's very easy. Go to jointhemajorityreport.com. Your support makes this show possible. So there's quite a bit of talk about a recession. Largely as the world goes, so do we, in many respects. And there's a couple of things to note before we hear Donald Trump pretend that it's not happening. One of the things that people are pointing to is this yield in the or inverse yield inverse in the yield curve, which basically means, I'm going to do broad strokes here because frankly I only have a rudimentary understanding of this. Long-term interest rates are rising above, and this only happened very briefly, I guess, for like an hour or two the other day. But every other time it's happened, 50 times, it has been predictive of a recession. Long-term interest rates rose above short-term interest rates, which basically means that people have concerns about the economy down the road, that that's basically what it is. I mean, it has to do with treasury bills and where investors think that safe places to go are and what yields will be, et cetera, et cetera. But that's the long and short of it. It happened very briefly, so who knows? The big concern, though, however, is that the Fed does not have much ability to lower interest rates more than they have, which is a tool that you need to fight a recession. The other tool that you could use would be government spending, which, of course, there's going to be massive reluctance to do it, particularly if a Democrat comes into office in 2021. They're going to use the excuse of this massive deficit and debt to say that cuts have to be taking place. And you could raise taxes on the very wealthy, pour that money back into the economy in a myriad of different ways, but unlikely that, the politics would have to be pretty different than they've been in the past 30 years. There's a report out today, CNBC, writes about economists who have examined the impact of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Job Act say it isn't helping in any of the ways advertised. Overall growth, business investment, or worker pay, all flatlined. Tax cuts have not generated the promised growth of 3% or more. There was an uptick. Then some of that stuff was revised down. We've already seen the bulk of it. A Congressional Research Service analysis. I want you to remember this because this is exactly what happened in Kansas. Now, in Kansas, it destroyed them because they don't have the ability to print money and borrow money. They have to balance their budget every year. But the argument is if we cut taxes, revenue will actually go up from taxes because there'll be so much more business activity that more money will come in. Complete disaster in Kansas. So much so that a fully Republican legislature voted to increase taxes 3 years later because it was so devastating, 4 years later. A Congressional Research Service analysis concluded that the law has produced, are you ready for this? Because when I say to you, I'm going to cut taxes and we're going to make more in revenue, that means that tax revenue, after I cut the rate of taxes, is actually going to come in at like 101% or 105% or 110% of what we cut in terms of taxes. The Research Service, Congressional Research Analysis, conclude the law has produced no more than 5% of the growth needed to offset the tax cut losses. So they missed it by that much. Are both my hands out of frame? Because that's the only way to communicate this. Here is Donald Trump. When asked about the economy, he thinks it's like a tennis match with China for some reason.
I don't see a recession. I mean, the world is in a recession right now. And although that's too big a statement, but if you look at China, China's doing very, very poorly. They've had, I just saw a report, they've had the worst year they've had in 27 years because of what I've done. And they want to come to the negotiating table. You know, they're having companies lose, I mean, they're leaving. The companies are leaving, and they're laying off millions of people because they don't want to pay 25%. And that's why they want to come to the table. I don't think there's another reason other than President Xi, I'm sure, likes me very much. But they're losing millions and millions of jobs in China. And we're not paying for the tariffs. China is paying for the tariffs for the 100th time. And I understand tariffs very well. Other countries, it may be that if I do things with other countries, but in the case of China, China is eating the tariffs. At least so far.
Might be a pivot time later today.
Right.
When I say
right.
So far, because I don't actually want a recession.
Right. Slight lack of understanding of the global implications.
We have an incredibly interdependent economy with China, which is why if they do bad, we do bad.
Everybody said when I wanted to start trading with Mars that it was pie in the sky, that now we have a backup. Don't need China. Have Mars.
It's a great signal for our economy that China is shedding jobs and having extreme instability.
So
it's exactly what you want
now
with
look,
a prime trade partner.
People are a little skeptical about Donald Trump and his grasp on these things. So who better to send out to assure us all that there's no recession coming?
A steady hand.
A steady hand. Than the guy who was famous for being the biggest booster of the stock market and the economy about 9 months before it had its biggest crash since the Great Depression. I will say this. This must have been pre-taped because this aired at 10 a.m. And later in the program, we're going to play a performance of his at 10:30 a.m. And there's simply, unless they have one of those beer funnels in this studio, there's no way he could have had this type of evolution, let's say.
Which is not to say that this is going to be sober.
Right, which is... I'm just saying that it takes usually a couple hours to get that, but I don't know. Here he is.
Just one last point.
Okay.
Low interest rates, which is across the spectrum, is a very good thing for housing, for construction, for automobile sales. So low interest rates, no inflation, virtually no inflation, Chuck Todd. So I actually think it's a pretty good story. And again, let me echo my theme. Let's not be afraid of some optimism.
Okay, you say that, but you know, you actually said that in 2007, right before the second worst downturn in American history. This is what you wrote. There's no recession coming. This is in December of 2007. The pessimistas were wrong. It's not going to happen. The Bush boom is alive and well. It's finishing up its 6th consecutive year with more to come. The more to come was a massive downturn. So I admire your optimism, but the data is pointing in another direction.
Well, I plead guilty to that late 2007 forecast. I plead guilty. By the way, every other forecaster, CBO,
you weren't alone. You weren't
OMB,
alone. That's
Blue
right.
Chip,
you weren't alone.
They were all there. However, just a wee bit of Kudlow defense now. By February and March,
I said we
on CNBC in those days, I did go to the recession call. So I will plead that I did see it. I don't know that anybody saw that kind of crash. But look, this is not then.
Pause. I just want to make it clear. It's not a question. First of all, there was a lot of people who saw a crash. A lot of people actually saw a major crash. I know this because I was talking about it. And if I was talking about it with only really an ability to read other people in terms of the economy, then clearly there were people talking about it. But let's not make a mistake here. He didn't say there's a chance for a slight downturn. He said we're in booming. And this guy was out there, optimism, 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 every day on TV. Every day.
That's the Bush boom. Great time to buy a derivative. Chuck Todd.
Here's the irony. That was when he was more sober, despite the fact his analysis was less sober. As it were. I'm speaking metaphorically. Continue.
Look, this is not then. This is not then. Our banks are well capitalized. Our financial system's in very good shape. And I must say, as the president is transforming and rebuilding this economy, he deserves enormous credit. A new policy of lower taxes and regulation and energy opening and trade reform. You know, we didn't quite get to 3%, but look, Chuck, the first 2 years of the Obama administration, we were just a hair below 3%.
Okay.
We're moving in the same direction.
Did you just call it the Obama administration? Did he just call it the Obama administration?
I think that's what he said.
We didn't quite get to 3%, but look, Chuck, the first 2 years of the Obama administration, we were just a hair below 3%.
Okay.
We're moving in the same direction. And let's be honest
What
here.
is he talking about?
We've
In the
faced
first 2 years?
Growth under Obama.
I'm talking
In the first 2 years of the Obama administration,
growth.
we were in a deep recession.
Yeah.
Oh, we were in a recession.
So he
Sam
must be
Seder?
talking about the Trump administration.
Oh, you must be Nostradamus. Ha ha ha.
Well,
Hey.
look, bottom line, we don't need to see any more of this because the really sad stuff will happen.
Luchad.
But the real problem, I think he's right to a certain extent that we don't have the same exposure in terms of the financial system, although who knows, but more than likely not. The problem is there is no slack. There is no room. And in the event that there is a downturn, I mean, we can spend, but you know, if a Democrat is elected president, all of these guys who don't care about the $1 trillion debt right now, they're going to be freaking out about this stuff.
I'm going to downturn this shot into my face, Chuck Todd.
All right. We got to get to this stuff. Will you let our guests know we're going to be a little bit late? This is good. I like doing ads like this because we have been advertising for Quip for several years, and now I just wait for the testimonials to roll in. What's the easiest way to ease back into a routine? Simplify mornings and evenings with an electric toothbrush from Quip. It's back to school time, folks. It's time Sonic Vibrations offer an effective clean that's gentle on your sensitive gums in just 2 minutes, twice a day. The multi-use cover works as a stand. It mounts to mirrors. It's great for traveling. Puts your brush front and center in your bathroom. And better yet, the lightweight compact design means that you can take it with you, not just on trips, but out and about on the town. But also traveling with it is huge because you keep your routine. Brush heads are automatically delivered on a dentist-recommended schedule every 3 months for just $5, making it easy to stay committed to your oral health. Folks, you know why I love Quip. I'll just sum it up. Gave one to my sister. I was I was quipping it. That's why I came up with that myself. And
did.
I gave one to my sister, Betsy. She texted me out of the blue. I mean, I had sort of forgotten I had given it to her. She texted me out of the blue. My dentist wanted me to thank you for giving me that quip. Says that my teeth are noticeably in better shape. What more do you need? The bottom line is oral hygiene. The key is to do it every day and to do it well. And the quip is designed both in terms of its shape and its ease and its placement on your sink or on your mirror, and with the timer to get you to do it every day. That's the key with this stuff. And that's why I love Quip and why it's perfect for getting back into a routine. Quip starts at just $25. To get yours, go to getquip.com/majority right now. You can get your first refill pack free. That's your first refill pack free at getquip.com/majority. So also, support from today's show comes from Embark, which is the most accurate dog DNA test kit on the market. Now, for non-dog owners, probably unclear why you would want a dog DNA test kit. Kelly has been using one with Edie. She says the whole process has been incredibly easy. She's super psyched about finding out about Edie, but there's more to it than just the ease of the use. I mean, as to the value of it. She says it's super easy, but after we did the first Embark ad, we got an email from somebody who I guess is overseas. They're in Britain. And he wrote in, my younger brother and best mate is 19 now. He was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when he was 5. He struggled for many years with significant anxiety, and his unique spirit and character was misunderstood by his peers for years. Things were tough, and despite our best efforts, we felt hopeless in trying to support him. We knew he had so much to give to the world, but couldn't find a way to support him to do so. For his 12th birthday, we adopted a golden retriever for him, which he named Gregor Samsa. Matt, right? The misunderstood,
Metamorphosis.
isolated, maligned protagonist from Kafka's The Metamorphosis. Since Gregor came along, my brother has never looked back. Almost immediately, he had someone who understood him, who he understood. Gregor gave him confidence, comfort, critically a way for him to meet new people without stressing about what to say or do straight away. In short, Gregor has become absolutely essential part of our family. We couldn't imagine where my brother would be had he not come along. At 7, Gregor is getting on. He's happy and healthy at the moment, but our vet recently suggested we get a DNA test to make sure we know what to expect and take all precautions. We chose Embark DNA because of its reputation and positive reviews, its simplicity of delivery and return, the fact that it tests for over 170 plus health conditions. The service was brilliant. And my brother loved learning more about his best friend. More importantly, our vet has tailored Gregor's diet in line with genetic predispositions, the results identified, giving us the confidence we're doing all we can to make sure Gregor is around for as long as possible. A dog DNA test may sound silly or like a novelty or a luxury. For us, it has been a way of showing our love and support to a complete member of our family. Sorry for the length, but absolutely cannot recommend Embark DNA enough.
It's beautiful.
Cheers. I mean,
that's amazing.
Yeah. It's nuts. So Embark has an exclusive summer offer for our listeners. Go to embarkvet.com. Use the promo code majority. Save 15% off your dog DNA test kit. You can discover your dog more than fur deep. Visit Embark, E-M-B-A-R-K, vet, V-E-T.com. Use promo code majority to save. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Joshua Specht about our Red Meat Republic. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program Professor of History at Monash University in Melbourne. I think I messed that up. Monash.
No, that was close enough.
Okay. And author of Red Meat Republic, A Hoof-to-Table History of How Beef Changed America. Joshua Specht, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Okay, so just the era that we're talking about, you follow this basically starting from the 1800s through the early 20th century, right?
Yeah.
Just tell us why beef? Why beef as a way of or what that tells us, I guess, about the way that America was developed, particularly the sort of the political economy?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, you know, at first the why beef, when I started writing this book, was I was just curious about it. And then what I discovered as I looked more and more about how beef was produced, that it tied into all these big stories at the heart of what it means to be American, but also at the heart of the American economy. So we think about the stories of the American West. Cattle ranching is obviously everywhere. We think about the history of cowboys. They're essentially cattle workers, as I talk about them. But also, the model for big industrial agriculture is pioneered by meat packers, often working with beef in Chicago. So what I see is a set of 4 firms headquartered in Chicago. You can think of Chicago as kind of the Silicon Valley of its day. And they remake both agriculture in the United States, but in a way industrial production. They pioneer things like the assembly line, or for them, a disassembly line.
Okay, so let's start with this notion of the. Are you there?
Yep.
Oh, sorry. Let's start with the notion of the cattle ranch, and you know you write that basically beef becomes or meat becomes a tool for conquest in some ways, and also a justification for one. Explain that dynamic.
Yeah, I think you've gotten to the heart of it. So if you think about the kind of far west in the United States, if you think about places like the Texas Panhandle.
I'm sorry, Professor, we're having a little bit of a...
I'm sorry,
Professor, excuse me. We're having just a little bit of problems. If I could just ring you back. We just have a little bit of trouble on that connection.
Sure thing.
Bye-bye. Folks, bear with us. Bear with us on this. Not sure what's going on, but...
Hello?
Hi. All right. Hopefully that's better. So I had asked you, you know, you had characterized beef as both a tool for conquest and a justification for conquest. And by conquest, of course, we're talking about the genocide and the displacement and of Native Americans at this time.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. And what I mean by that is that for much of the American West, it was an area considered initially, in particular, way too dry to farm. And so at times in the mid-19th century, it was a place you might want to cross over to get to somewhere like California, but it wasn't quite sure what you could do with this land. And at some point, Americans started to look around and they saw the bison. They saw lots of bison thriving and they wanted to hunt those. But then they started to look at their cattle and they thought, you know, we could graze these on a large scale and just replace these bison with our cattle. And all of a sudden, they had an economic reason to use the land. They had a way they could make money out of it. And to them, this was a kind of higher use for the land than, say, either hunting bison, as American Indians were doing, or the kind of highly mobile agriculture they saw. So they both wanted to make money out of cattle, and they viewed that as making it legitimate to seize the land from American Indians. And they would not have been able to do this without the rise of this kind of range cattle industry.
Who were the they in this instance? And to what extent did they have like other, I mean, can you go into a little bit of the sort of the perhaps the other sort of like economic reasons why they would want to settle? I mean, it just seems like on some level they're looking around for, you know, a solution to a problem that isn't there. unless that problem is, how can we exploit more? How can I amass more cash?
Right. Well, I think the motivations of these people is kind of hard to figure out. I wrestled with this as I wrote the book. So I tell the story of a woman named Susan Newcomb, who's born in the Midwest, and as a teenage bride moves with her husband to the very remote part of Texas. And I read through her diaries and I try to understand, well, what are they doing here? What is their plan? And to an extent, there was an idea that moving to a place like that could give you a fresh start. You might not have had, you might have been a second or third born in the Midwest, not getting the family farm. You could kind of create your own land. But, so at first a lot of these people are engaged in things like hunting. So they're hunting the bison, and we see a lot of crossover between kind of small-scale cattle ranching and bison hunting. And we just see a lot of attempts to basically play out the logic that had happened in the East Coast of the United States, right? The whole logic of the United States was based on acquiring land for farming, and once your area gets settled up, you kind of move farther and farther west, and eventually it got to these dry areas where you had to embrace something like cattle ranching.
I see. And then, so following that sort of that change that took place there, tell us what the relevance of, how reservations sort of played into this dynamic.
Well, one thing that I thought was interesting is I thought there was a kind of straightforward story of basically a violent story of the United States military essentially seizing all this land from American Indians, kind of opening up a vast canvas that then settled by American citizens. What I actually see happening is a kind of on-the-ground, small-scale process of people moving into places, taking land, and kind of fighting back and forth. So early cattle ranchers are almost like paramilitaries in some places. Then, towards the end of this process, they create this reservation system where the majority of land is taken by the United States. Many different American Indians are forced onto these very small parcels of land. And so I thought maybe that's the end of that story. But what you actually see is that the means for many of these American Indians to support themselves off the bison, they're gone. So they're forced onto this land that they can't really farm. They have no way to support themselves. And so the United States government starts supplying them with beef handouts, rations. And many times the lucrative contracts for these handouts come from ranchers. So this reservation system becomes an early subsidy. The ranchers then see these American Indians who are relying on, what they call handouts or rations at the time, and they say, look, these people can't support themselves. What we've done here is justified. So they look around and see this reservation system. It both subsidizes them and justifies what they've done to them.
So there's sort of like a classic self-licking ice cream cone. We put them in a position where they cannot sustain themselves, and then say their inability to sustain themselves is exactly why we've had to put them in this position.
Exactly. And of course, you see that kind of dynamic all the time with dispossessed and marginal populations as a justification from the more powerful. And
how does that just happen? I mean, do people just sort of like develop that as they go? How planned is that notion?
That's a fascinating question and one I thought about a lot. To some extent, there was a big picture plan. I more see it, though, as often if you look at what's happening in these kind of remote forts and outposts, what you actually see is they mostly want to just avoid conflict, but all of their assumptions and ideology matches the assumptions and ideology of these early ranchers. So whenever there's a conflict with American Indians, they obviously side with the ranchers and farmers. And so it's a kind of piecemeal process, but it all aggregates and matches up in kind of their big picture assumptions about what is justified. And behind everything is the assumption that we're using this land productively, therefore we can claim it.
Right. I've heard that somewhere before, actually, in my discussions with modern day libertarians, looking back on why their property rights trumped the indigenous people's property rights. But then,
interesting.
So moving from that era, we move into this sort of era of which ends up being a sort of a false start on some level of corporate ranches. Explain that dynamic and where are we in terms of time at this point?
Okay, so in our story, we're We're talking earlier in the 19th century, so we're talking 1840s, 1850s, 1860s. But the story really takes off after the American Civil War ends in 1865. And so some of this is happening in the 1860s into the 1870s. And by the late 1870s, 1880s, investors from the American East and as far away as places like Scotland say, you know, we could try to turn this ranching thing into big business. So they move in with lots of money, and they see 100 herds of 1,000 cattle, and they say, we can make this into one herd of 100,000 cattle. And where you dealt with hundreds, we deal with thousands or tens of thousands. And so all of a sudden, this becomes the hottest new investment of the 1880s. Everybody's starting up these ranches. You see these kind of millionaire playboys from places like England moving out west, and this is kind of their like toy business. But you also see this running on very sound business principles. The problem is people are a little too exuberant, a story we see oftentimes in the history of American capitalism. And everybody basically is over-investing, making bad deals, and the whole thing kind of blows up. So the big corporate ranch doesn't really take off because there's this big boom in cattle, and there are some disastrous winters in the 1880s. And at the end of that story, just when this is all falling apart, this boom and bust cycle, there's these firms in Chicago that start to think about how they can slaughter cattle in Chicago and distribute the meat fresh all around the country. And when everybody's going out of business, they're buying all their cattle, and all of a sudden these small companies in Chicago turn into global behemoths in the late 1880s.
Okay, so wait, so let me just stop there and just so we should also say, like, this period of time is, I just remember this from as a kid watching Bonanza and the Ponderosa, right? This was basically the story of the Ponderosa on some level, right? They were cattle ranchers. Yeah. And so, okay, so where is, when all these people are coming in, presumably after the Civil War, and they're coming in, they're pouring all this money, like, where's the market for this? Like, who is eating this beef and how, right? At that point.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So basically, most of the cattle, or there's a lot of cattle in Texas. And there's cattle all across the U.S., but the kind of surplus of cattle in Texas is the key to this story. So before the American Civil War, there had been some ranching in Texas, and Texas was linked with New Orleans, east to west. The American Civil War basically ends that trade because the Union doesn't want that happening. And all of a sudden, there are these cattle just accumulating in Texas doing their thing, right? Grazing, reproducing. And during the American Civil War in the 1860s, all these cities in the North are getting huge, and they're developing a national market. Chicago is a big city now. New York is getting even bigger. Boston. And so there's all these hungry people in these cities in the North, and all these cattle in places like Texas and kind of remote areas in the West. So as of right now, there's no way to really link those two. But these big ranches realize, hey, if we can move cattle quickly from Texas or Wyoming to Chicago, we can get rich. And so that's that kind of story you're telling me. So this is where you get the kind of famous cattle drives of the Old West, moving hundreds of thousands of animals to places like, Kansas to get them into the rail lines into Chicago.
And then in Chicago, presumably they go into the slaughterhouse and then they get sent to the east. Is that the idea?
Yeah. So in the early part of this story, Chicago is just kind of the center of the rail network east. So the animals go alive to Chicago, and then they spread out alive to cities around the east coast of the U.S. But starting in the 1870s, these savvy business people in Chicago start trying to figure out how to make a refrigerated rail car, essentially a moving refrigerator. It's kind of a disaster at first. They crash a lot. They try to hang the meat, and it swings too much, and the cars topple over. But eventually they work it out. And all of a sudden, instead of shipping these live animals all around the country, which can be expensive, they can do everything in Chicago, centralize all the business, and very quickly and cheaply send it everywhere fresh. And that's how these businesses capitalize on everything that's happening out west to take over global meat from Chicago.
And so you end up having this dynamic where because the corporate ranches got too big, I guess, and then they end up basically dispersing, or they had too much, liability. One bad blizzard can destroy their business.
Yep.
The slaughterhouses become the essentially have like a monopsony, I guess, and they end up controlling the market and therefore dictate both ends of the supply chain, right? Where, you know, what they're going to pay and how much they're going to extract as it goes east.
Yeah, I mean, you've got it exactly right. So the technical thing would be, say, they have an oligopsony. So they are kind of, there's 3 or 4 firms, they control selling to customers and buying. Now, the less technical Texas version of that is to say they have both ends of the string, as people in the period like to say. And what that means is, basically, they can capture all the profit. So they bankrupt, they go around the United States on the customer end and bankrupt all the local people. And so they control the whole supply chain there. And because the ranches, the big ranches have failed, the meat packers in Chicago kind of dictate what they want to the ranchers, because the ranchers are all small and relatively scattered. And so they become a behemoth. And this mobilizes all sorts of political conversations about whether these packers are too powerful. Should the government do something? Maybe should they break them up, which is a bit like debates about tech companies today. But this starts a whole conversation about the relationship between business and government. And
there's a couple of, at that point, well, it's interesting, I guess, is like the quote from Sinclair Lewis. He was trying to appeal to people's hearts and missed and hit their stomach. The idea being Upton Sinclair, sorry. The idea being that he was concerned about the plight of workers in this, and ultimately what really stuck with people was the sort of the quality and the safety of the meat, right? So is that why we get around this time, we're now around the Federal Meat Inspection Act, right?
Yeah. So basically what happens is, you know, there's a story we can tell about these Chicago slaughterhouses. It's a story of kind of business genius and innovation. In a lot of ways, they pioneer what looks like the assembly line. And Henry Ford in his memoirs said he got the idea for the automobile assembly line from Chicago, although they called it a disassembly line because they were taking one animal carcass and making it into all sorts of different things.
Right.
And that could be a story of innovation, right? They come up with this breaking it into tasks, but it's also a story of incredible labor exploitation. Because when you break things into individual tasks, very specialized ones, it doesn't just magically make people more productive. It enables you to work them harder, right? So you have people who set the pace, so you pay a little more to work extra hard. You can train people and overwork them because you can replace them easily. And so the slaughterhouse becomes this site of incredible exploitation. And Upton Sinclair becomes curious about this and studies it, and he's a kind of socialist revolutionary. So he writes The Jungle, the story of this immigrant family's toil in Chicago, as the precursor to a revolution. But along the way, he talks about contamination quite graphically, talking about it, you know, a finger falling into a vat, talking about animal feces contamination. And because that's so visceral to people who are eating things, that really becomes the way the public starts to mobilize. And if you think about it, business doesn't want to be regulated in terms of labor standards, but they're happy to work on sanitation issues because they want to restore consumer trust in their product. And so they quite quickly realize that this kind of sanitation is a problem they can, you know, solve to encourage people. And that's how we get that problem.
And we should say also that specialization of the workers completely diminishes worker power, right? Because you become literally a cog in a machine.
Yeah, and so what we see, I mean, in my part of the story, I argue all this action happens between about 1880 and 1900 or 1910. And there are attempts to unionize, but there's a legal regime and a kind of government that's not very sympathetic to organized labor. And so they can't effectively unionize in the key story I'm talking about. Now, in the 20th century, meat packing workers do unionize, but already their baseline assumptions about the kinds of jobs they have are so kind of eroded by that period I write about. And so, yeah, worker power is quite limited during this period.
And then once we get into that sort of like the state regulating both the sort of the health requirements and the hygiene and best business practices, I guess. Following that, there becomes sort of like more questions about antitrust.
Yeah. So I like to think of a key actor at the end of my story is Teddy Roosevelt. So if we talk about Upton Sinclair as a revolutionary, Teddy Roosevelt is kind of the perfect politician to tame capitalism, which is kind of what happens. So he is very suspicious of big corporations, but he's also suspicious of organized labor and, what he sees as socialism. And so he says, in order to kind of save American capitalism from itself, we need to regulate it. So he accepts huge centralized meatpacking as kind of an inevitable development, but he says we're going to, act to regulate them and prevent them from engaging in practices that are too predatory or from cooperating too much. And so he does things like he organizes an investigation of the meatpacking industry, or as they called it, the Beef Trust. When the meatpackers try to say, we're not colluding, we're all going to form one gigantic company, they say, no, you can't do that, and there's all sorts of court investigations starting to limit their power. But in all of this, they accept that big centralized food production is necessary to the world we live in, and that continues to today.
So, what is the... how much of this is sort of unique to meat as opposed to just sort of the development that we see? Where is meat relative to other, I guess, products or commercial, things like where, because obviously, we have this story that scholars have been looking at in terms of cotton and it being, closely tied into slavery, but the implications of the cotton in terms of the economy of the entire country, not just the South, but of the East, the Northeast, and around the world to a certain extent. The cotton, because of that dynamic of slavery and the free labor, and it begins to drive everything. Like where does meat, like, I guess, rate relative to cotton within that sort of ecosystem?
That's interesting. I like to think of it maybe as the questions of the early American economy and its exploitation and how it works in markets. Cotton is kind of the product to understand that. I think in the late 19th century, beef ends up being the perfect product to understand the challenges of the late 19th century American economy. And that's in part because it's so complicated to produce and distribute. So the fact that they want to distribute it fresh, people like fresh beef as opposed to some other meat products they might eat cured, because it has to stay fresh from Chicago to New York or Chicago to Boston or Chicago all the way to London, there's all sorts of challenges businesses face in coordination. Similarly, because cattle have to be produced far away, they're rural animals, there's all sorts of questions of coordination to get the animal from, say, Texas or Montana to Chicago. And all these challenges mean that the meat packers are figuring out these complicated questions of supply chains and distribution that create a model that then are copied in all sorts of industries, right? So they figure out how to efficiently slaughter an animal without it spoiling and pioneer the assembly line. They figure out how to distribute fresh products, which then becomes important to distributing fresh fruits and vegetables, which oddly the meat packers actually control in the early 20th century. And so all these challenges, the beef packers kind of pioneer the solution that then gets taken up by other people. And that's why I think understanding the history of American beef is so important.
What was driving the demand for meat? I understand, like, it's just, I guess my sense of that era was like, oh, meat is a luxury. You don't see it that much. Obviously because of the challenges you're talking about, but I'm trying to get a grip on, I would imagine that someone in that era, particularly in the mid 1800s, sees like, look at this massive country, and if I could put railroad tracks down everywhere in this country, I could own like everything. I could, go in and speculate on real estate because I have control of over transportation. I could speculate in real estate all across the country. I could look at destinations. I could look at places that we're going to have to pass through. But I need something to send by rail, and I need a commodity. And in terms of like going east-west, and I'm asking if this is if there's an element of this. Like, beef seems to be the thing, but there isn't a market for beef. How do we juice this thing? Like, I mean, how much of a market was there? Was this something that like we're going to, figure out how to downscale beef? I mean, because we have a version of this, right, in the early 70s when the Nixon administration basically said we're going to subsidize corn, which is going to make everything cheaper in terms of food. Right. And that's going to put more money in people's pockets, and it's going to help the economy, et cetera, which is going to help all these industries. I mean, of course, in the mid 1800s, there wasn't that there wasn't so many different sort of layers into making that determination. But how much of it was like we're going to use beef as the thing that's going to sort of open up? We're going to create a market with that, but it's going to open up all these other markets for me.
Well, I think that's interesting. I mean, I think from the viewpoint of the railroads, the funny thing about the story is in terms of this fresh beef slaughtered in Chicago, the railroads are initially very skeptical. They don't want to get involved because they have such a good trade shipping live cattle all over the U.S. And so they force the meat packers to develop their own ideas, their own refrigerated rail cars. And all of a sudden when that takes off, the meat packers are holding all the carts. So in a way, they become more powerful than the railroads. But to get to your point about why meat, I've thought about this a bit because I kind of wondered, well, say they start producing all this beef, presumably they got to convince people to eat all this meat or to want it, right? And what I realized when I started reading about what beef kind of meant to people is that for most of the people who were immigrating and coming to the U.S. or already living in the U.S. in this period, they already had a pre-existing preference for fresh beef. Fresh beef, in a way, was a special occasion food. And so people were used to eating it on feast days or special kinds of holidays for special occasions. And so what that meant is if you could provide them with this thing that had been expensive so they only had it on special occasions, if you could provide them that cheaply, they would want to turn that special occasion food into an all-the-time food. And so the story and consumption becomes this occasional food becoming a dietary staple and higher expectations in terms of quality. And so that just ensures that as much as you can produce this, in the late 19th century, people are going to consume it. Now, as we saw, beef consumption peaks in the 1970s in the U.S. and has come down some. But through that period, just anything you can produce, people will want it. And that kind of makes the distribution of beef, which is bulky and heavy, a perfect thing to distribute in a national rail network.
And so where does that leave us now? I mean, when we're looking at the story of sort of the, I guess, the political economy, where is beef's future and what, I mean, I guess what lessons can we learn in terms about the way that decisions were made going forward? I mean, the labor stuff seems to, and we're going to play an interview next week about the car industry, and so many decisions about logistics were made basically to diminish the power of labor.
Right.
It doesn't feel like that was as conscious of an effort in this instance because the labor was so sort of in some ways, except for in the slaughterhouses, removed in terms of the process of which stuff was being built. But, delivered. But, I mean, how much of that is, what is the lesson we're learning from this?
Well, I think there's kind of, I've thought about this some since finishing the book, and I think there's kind of two key things. I mean, the first is that labor is a major issue in terms of the slaughterhouse, and there's all sorts of fights in my period, and you still see it today. I mean, with these recent raids by ICE on these facilities in the South. So still kind of marginal labor is important to this business. But as far as lessons today, I think the key thing we see with industrial food, and it's pioneered in the beef industry, is that low prices to the consumer become an overarching organizing principle and a justification for things are done. So when people say, hey, this is exploitative of labor, or this is destroying local environments and communities, people from the industry say, well, that's what we have to do to provide cheap beef. And because the whole system is organized around that, then any change to that system is in fact going to raise food prices. And making food unaffordable is not exactly a good policy solution. So I think one of the insights is that changing these things is going to make it more expensive, and that ties into a much broader question about a more equitable society. So beef will become more expensive, and people need to be better able to afford it. And beyond that, in terms of Go ahead.
No, I mean, so I mean, is that used as a mechanism to prohibit reform? I mean, it sounds like
definitely.
It is.
Yeah. So in the 19th century, and then I'll tell you about the present briefly. The 19th century, you see that people are investigating Philip Danforth Armour, one of the biggest meat packers, and he basically says, we have to do this. If you want to feed the urban masses, feed the common laborers, he said at the time, these are the rules we have to play by, and that's how he avoids regulation. Today, if you think about increasingly in debates about the Green New Deal, where people are saying we have to think differently about beef production, basically often critics of that are saying, that they're coming for your hamburgers. They're saying you're not going to be able to afford your hamburgers anymore, and that turns a kind of consumer concern to deflect a criticism of how it's produced. And so you see that parallel even today.
That's fascinating. And do you expect more of that? I mean, where do you see the future? Is that basically it? We need to, if we're going, we as a society are going to have to make a decision.
Yep. Well, I think the other point, though, so that is a concern about all sorts of industrial production and commodities. The other thing, of course, is the environmental impact. I mean, all the evidence suggests that society needs to reduce its meat consumption dramatically. And that has to happen over time. But in the short term, we have to think about the impacts of that. And so the worst cases in terms of climate change is deforestation in Latin America. And while American beef production is kind of not directly coming from that, there are potential trade deals that are happening between the United States and Brazil that could put some of that meat on the American table. There's a whole conversation about beef and climate change that I think we have to be thinking about now that my characters weren't thinking about in 1880.
Well, the book is Red Meat Republic, A Hoof-to-Table History of How Beef Changed America. Joshua Specht, we will put a link to your book on majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me on.
All right, folks. We're going to take a quick break, head into the fun half, wherein we will play the Larry Kudlow, who has had time to marinate from the earlier conversation he had with Chuck Todd.
Time to soak in the info. That reminded me a bit of, do you guys remember that documentary, King Corn?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I interviewed those guys.
You must have. But I think that would have been Air America days, right? It's a while ago.
Yeah, but I think I interviewed them later. I'm not quite sure. But yes, there was a couple of documentaries about corn at that time when people understood the sort of the implications of that big agribusiness. And of course, I think if you were to do an updated version of Red Meat Republic, corn would play an outsized role.
Huge role in it. And it would be interesting to do a through line of the rationalization from these meat packing plants to Amazon. My other thought.
Just a reminder, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, we give you extra content every day. During the break, even, people are going to have access to the deep archives. Brendan has been thumbing through the pages of our deep archives, picking out stuff that he thinks is going to be interesting for people. When I say deep archives, I mean deep archives. I'm talking almost over a decade old. No, over a decade old. It's very interesting stuff. Back in the day when Air America launched, the Majority Report was in its first iteration. We had some super high-powered guests at that time. So you have access to all of that by becoming a member. Plus, you'll get the free show without commercials. But as always, you can find information about the commercials in your podcast notes. So if you want a deal on something, you check that out. Michael, tonight is Monday. That means tomorrow is Tuesday.
Yes, indeed. And on Tuesday, we're going to be talking with Shahid Buttar, who's running to challenge Nancy Pelosi in the Democratic primary. I'm going to obviously be really interested in his ideas on foreign policy and how he might represent a change and rupture in that regard and how his campaign fits with the broader movement. Then
he came in very close last time around. I mean, it was only in the race for the last 3 months of the race. and in the primary. Now he's starting out a year ahead.
No, he's clearly got real chops. And I mean, I've actually been seeing that there's some other candidates in the mix, some of whom seem pretty appealing as well. But he does seem like if somebody's going to pull off a completely Herculean upset like that, seems like he probably is the candidate to do it. So I'm looking forward to talking with him. Anna Kasparian's going to join us, and we're talking about that incident that we played of the ice truck in Rhode Island, kind of trying to basically drive through the protesters, and how we can correlate that with the state initiatives that Republicans have pushed to essentially criminalize protest across the country. Of course, Kashmir, Argentina, a whole bunch more. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks to our first 70,000 subscribers on YouTube as well. And see us in Chicago this weekend. Still tickets. Grab one.
Jamie's out, but I know she recorded a new Antifada yesterday. So go to patreon.com/Antifada, the Antifada, to check out what they got going, and her side project about vampires, real vampires.
On Literary Hangover this weekend was the second weekend in a row with a new patron episode. George Orwell shooting an elephant, and we problematize Orwell and cancel him. So look, that's fun.
I was wondering what happened to Orwell.
Oh no, he's going to stick around. We don't really cancel him, but we do talk about some.
Just do a little probation, right?
Yeah, he's put into a Burmese jail for a little bit,
just to reflect,
because of his lack of deepness in his representation of Burmese subjects in Under the Raj. So,
folks, you love your dog, right? Well, you want to know more about you. I mean, unfortunately, your dog cannot say like, "Oh yeah, no, I was born in Chicago." And my dad was a terrier. My mom was a golden retriever. It was beautiful. They were not supposed to get together.
The oral traditions are not strong.
Not strong in dog. Well, that's why Embark Dog DNA Test Kit looks at over 250 breeds and 170 genetic health conditions to help you care best for your pup. So not only can you find out the origins of your puppy or dog, and also, you can find out what things to look out for. You know, dogs have a lot of genetic predispositions to different diseases, to different, and certain foods are better for them. If you love your dog, you want your dog to be around for as long as possible. An Embark Dog DNA Test Kit is the best way to do it. And right now, for our listeners, Embark has an exclusive summer offer you can't get anywhere else. Go to embarkvet.com. Use the promo code MAJORITY. You'll get 15% off your dog DNA test kit. It will allow you to discover your dog more than fur deep. There you go.
It's a great idea.
embarkvet.com. Use the promo code MAJORITY to save. Check it out. Also, just getting this breaking news. It seems like the cop who was involved in the Eric Garner choking and death, Daniel Pantaleo, has been fired by the New York Police Department. No criminal charges as of yet. But but he is gone, and that's important. That's an important development. Overdue, but sometimes the wheels of justice move slowly. The guy should actually be on criminal trial. I mean, without a doubt. But at the very least, the New York Police Department has severed its ties. All right, quick break. Fun half. 646-257-3920. See you there. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. Dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457-2-38-56-27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're not paying.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
we are back. Sam Seder, fun half. There's a story out there. We may talk about this on Wednesday. Oh, you know, I meant to say this in the first half of the program, and we will get to it. I think on Wednesday, at the very least, we'll cover this. Either Wednesday or Tuesday. I'm not sure what we're going to be doing. But on Friday, in my conversation with Ben Dixon, I asserted that the Democrats had not come out, that none of the Democrats had come out, or the Democratic Party, I don't know exactly how I phrased it, needed to get a strong policy on immigration so that there's actually something they can run on rather than just sort of like bobbing and weaving about what's going on. And a couple of folks on Twitter, particularly the noted host of Redirect, the immigration podcast.
It's a really good podcast.
It's okay. Ronald Reagan said, why didn't you mention Warren's plan? And frankly, I had missed it. To be honest with you, I'd missed it. This was in July. And we will get into the details of that plan. It's a very good plan. It's very strong. And it's pretty detailed. It is still, I think, incumbent on Democrats to come up with a broad principle. But ultimately, what this is going to come down to is just like, it really is going to come down to a very general idea. And I don't want to step on, stuff when I start talking about this, but I did accidentally listen to an episode of the Redirect this weekend. The one about the public charge rules that and the bottom line is the way that these changes happen ostensibly there's no, they're not making some big edict. We're going to keep people out. It is like a death by 1,000 cuts. And it's going to end up immiserating hundreds of thousands of people. Not the least of which it sounds like Ronald Reagan, because he make his job very hard as an immigration lawyer, as if it wasn't hard enough. But the idea ultimately is like knowledge of the specifics of these plans are one thing, but really at the end of the day, it's summing up what the point of it is. Like, are we going to be open to take in refugees? Are we going to be open to take in immigrants without putting up unnecessary obstacles and whatnot? I mean, I think broadly, most people accept the baseline of like, we should know who comes in and out of the country. That's important to know for security reasons, and largely for security reasons. But you do not have to criminalize people who come in and turn out to just be people who want to live here. And if they have any decent reason for being here, family, I'm leaving hardship, then we should let them stay. There is no indication that there is some specific group of people who come in who are going to be any more or less apt to contribute to our society than any other group. It just doesn't exist. And there does not seem to be a compelling reason to not let them in, other than just sheer spite.
And to ethnically engineer an electorate.
I mean, I put that in spite. Right?
I would probably, yeah. It's in the mix at least.
We'll talk more about this when we go over the new stuff. In the meantime, I just wanted to give a shout out. But boy, that Ronald Reagan, he comes on our show and he's he comes off as being,
sort of immature.
No, on
geeky.
the opposite. I was going to say, boy, he's so whiny on his show.
Oh, right. His show is just endless kvetching.
Oh my gosh.
Ronald Reagan shows up and tells his casework. He's like, "You think you have problems?"
Yeah, it's just complain. But it's worth checking out just to see how he does it.
It's
redirect.
A really good
All
show.
right. So speaking of which, so we played earlier in the program Larry Kudlow on Meet the Press. Sunday morning, airs at 10 a.m. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll pre-tape stuff, particularly if you've got to do an LTN connection with, let's say, Fox News. And so you'll pre-tape it so there's enough distance, so you get a little bit of time. Now, the problem is that maybe, you're sitting and you're in the White House. You're in the White House area waiting to do, a hit on morning television. And look, you're just sitting and it's boring. And they have a spread.
And the bottle's just sitting there.
And it's just like, you're just looking for something to kill the time. And
that's just day somewhere.
So by the time he gets on Fox News to talk about the trade tensions that exist, he's on there with Dana Perino, who was the paid liar for the Bush administration. He's talking about Greenland. And so, when you're not having to talk up the economy, the pressure's a little bit off. So why not? Why not let loose? It's sort of like a weekend.
It's our history.
It is a weekend.
A lot of history
Sunday.
professors, they like take a little sip.
Favorites. China is paying for these tariffs by
I'm
a
sorry,
ratio.
can we go
of-
backwards a little bit? I'm curious as to what the question. We have a question? Oh, okay. Incidentally, China is the word that he's saying.
By a ratio
go back to the
of
beginning.
about 4 to 1.
Go back to the head of that. I just want to make it clear.
China.
Good.
Favorites.
China China is paying for these tariffs by a ratio of about 4 to 1.
Larry,
and that's what we expected to happen.
I've enjoyed having you. I have one last question. If you get asked to go do a site survey about purchasing Greenland, can I go with you?
Well, maybe I'll run the central bank. Look, it's an interesting story. It's developing. We're looking at it. We don't know. Years ago, Harry Truman wanted to buy Greenland. Denmark owns Greenland. Denmark is an ally. Greenland is a strategic place up there. And they got a lot of valuable minerals. I don't want to predict an outcome. I'm just saying the president, who knows a thing or two about buying real estate, wants to take a look at
and all I'm saying is that if you get
purchase.
asked, all I'm saying is that if you get asked to go and do a site survey, I'd love to accompany you on the trip and do an interview out there. Larry Kudlow, thank you for joining us. Happy Sunday.
You're funny, Larry.
So, let's talk about Greenland for 1 second. But let me just put to bed this whole China thing.
But they are friends. Denmark is our friend. Greenland. Wait a second.
I am worried. I am worried that I am super worried that he is due for another heart attack soon.
The beginning of this interview is actually kind of funny.
Let's watch the beginning. Let's go back and watch the beginning. Remember, like what was it? 8 months ago when he first came on after 3 or 4 months, he had a heart attack.
He was like he did a series of these type of interviews where he was visibly like cold sweating.
Yeah,
my heart was so wet.
Yeah.
And joining me now, White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow. Welcome to Fox News Sunday, Larry.
Thank you, Dana. Appreciate it.
So, Larry, there's been a mixed bag.
Oh.
We were talking just about it. Kevin showed it.
Oh my God! Goals for debate coverage
Dow
right here.
dropped, then it bounced back. Retail sales are up. Job growth continues. Manufacturing slowing down.
At what point do you think she realizes that he's completely
considering
wasted?
any new legislative policies or executive actions to stave off what some are saying could be a possible coming
look
recession?
At his
eyes. Well, first of all, I don't see a recession at all. Second of all, the Trump pro-growth program, which I believe has been succeeding, lower tax rates, big rollback of regulations.
Oh, pause it. Incidentally, none of this is true. I mean, to the extent that there's been a rollback of regulation, that is true to a certain extent. Certainly the rate of regulation has dropped. And they have rolled back some very key regulations that keep people healthy. The tax cuts are not working unless your measure is are really rich people getting richer.
What about the black unemployment rate, Sam Seder?
It is true that the trajectory has remained the same, but that is after a huge, supposedly, priming of the pump, supposedly.
What about the amount of Dominicans who have pharmacy degrees now, Sam Seder?
Trade reform. We're going to stay with that. We believe that's the heart of the free enterprise. We want an incentive-oriented supply-side economy, providing opportunities for everybody across the board. And as your report mentioned, look, we have blowout retail sales. Let me just pause there. Consumers, first of all, they're working. The employment numbers are terrific. Second of all, they're working at much higher wages. Third of all, they're spending.
No, that's true.
And fourth of all, interestingly, they are saving even while they're spending. That's about as good as it gets. And I notice at the end of the week, a lot of the Wall Street firms have been marking up their economic growth forecast. I think we're in pretty good shape. And I want to just say, you know, we should not be afraid of optimism. I don't know what it is. Everybody wants to talk about pessimism. Recession.
Pause. Okay. This is, I mean, look, I just want to say this. In all honesty, I met Larry Kudlow. I don't know. I did his show probably a dozen times over a small period of time. At one point, I was like, you got to pay me if you want me to come out to New Jersey. I'm just not going to do it anymore. But he was very gracious. He was always nice to me. Always enjoyed me getting into an argument. I worry about his health. Honestly, you know, with that said, you go and you sign up for this administration, which is disgusting, which is doing disgusting things to the environment, to our society at large. Racist. They're kidnapping children. They are, I mean, if he needs to drink to allow himself to continue to work for this, you know, I feel bad for him, but it has its limits, if you know what I mean.
I try a little bit of employment optimism, Sam Seder. I did a radio show, but no, I said forget. We're gonna do the '80s again, and it's gonna be Trump, and it's gonna be me, and we're just gonna crash, and it's gonna be a beautiful day to parade
as if
in
being
Greenland.
Afraid of optimism is a problem.
Oh, you're afraid of it. You got your podcast, Matlack. You got the patrons. It's coming along. Everybody just needs to think about the future.
Future. Should we look at another sad guy?
ZipRecruiter, mid-roll,
No,
new economy.
What is it? I don't know what this. Somebody sent me this. Oh, Jesus. Yeah, why not? I'm just curious as to what's going on. Maybe somebody knows. Because my understanding was, well, I don't know. This is just an example. I'm just throwing. I don't even know what to say about this. This is just an. I don't know what the story. Maybe he's joking. Do we know? Let's just play this clip. Apparently, this was on his live show. He gets a request to interview a Democratic, I guess, challenger. I don't know, to an incumbent Republican or to an incumbent Democrat. We don't really have candidates on this show. On Ring of Fire, we do that. We've had 3 challengers to Democrats on the show so far, 2 or 3, or maybe one's extra is booked. We had someone on who's a challenger to Nunes. I prefer really right now looking at primary challengers to Democrats. Even Democrats, and I have to say that like during Mike Capuano, I can't pronounce his name, Ayanna Pressley race, I wondered if the resources were worth, because Capuano was a pretty progressive Democrat. But there's 2 things that I've come to believe about primaries. One is sort of temporally unique, that the era of primary challengers, the era of new Democrats, the younger Democrats are better. All things equal, the younger Democratic generation is better. I'm not saying because they're young, they're better. I'm saying it just so happens that for whatever reason, I have a bunch of theories as to baby boomers, overshadowing my generation, because my generation of Democrats, not so impressive. But the younger ones, they're better. Their politics, even when their politics are the same in terms of like where they are in terms of policy, their understanding of the Republican Party and the political age we're living in is better. We're going to have her on, but there's a pollster out there, I can't remember her name now, who predicted the 2018 wave almost down to each individual race, like within one, way before anybody else. And she's using a different model that's been used before. And the model basically is this. We're living in a hyper-partisan era. This is not going to go away. And who you mobilize for Democrats and for Republicans is the issue. There's no persuading. There's no convincing, Republican-leaning independents to vote for the Democrat. It doesn't work that way. It's bringing out people who haven't voted in the past or aren't mobilized based upon negative partisanship. So impeachment, which theoretically has nothing to do, you could be a blue dog Democrat and a Democratic socialist, and you could both be for impeachment, or you theoretically could be both against it. But the point is, in this day and age, being for it helps you electorally. And she's gone back and looked at the races that were lost. People who were moderate lost because they were not distancing themselves enough from Donald Trump. So this generation of Democrats is much better about that. They're much bolder, even if their positions are not any different. Often they are. The other thing is, it's very good to discipline the sitting Democrats, even if you like them. Because when Jerry Nadler gets a challenge based upon impeachment, it gives him ammunition to go to Nancy Pelosi and say, hey, look, I can't give you this one because I'm going to lose my seat. So we understand each other. I'm going to lose my seat if I don't go for this. Now, I don't know that that's his reasoning or not, but it helps. So my point is, this is everything I'm giving you is based on just sort of analysis that has nothing to do with me. Now I'm going to give you an example of someone who bases their analysis of these such things based on stupid, petty arguments. I don't know if he had an argument with Cenk or with Kyle Kulinski or the people at Justice Democrats who are there now, or if he's just mad because AOC won't go on his, show, or somebody's not returning a tweet. But this type of stuff is ridiculous. Maybe he's joking. Maybe he's joking, but I don't think so.
Super liberal, ultra proud millennial American blah, blah, says, hey, Jimmy, will you consider interviewing my friend Lauren Ashcraft, who is, watch your mouth, who is, right, it's called a butt crack. My friend Lauren Buttcrack, who is running in New York's 12th. She just had an interview with Mike Figueredo and Cenk. Well, then she's covered then. Sure, I'll have Lauren Ashcraft on. Is Lauren Ashcraft a Justice Democrat? See if Lauren Ashcraft is a Justice Democrat. If she is, probably not.
What did you just say, Ruby?
She's not a Justice Democrat?
No, she's a progressive Democrat from the District 12 in New York.
All right. Take her name down. Let's see if we can get her on then.
That's weird.
She a Justice
She
Democrat?
does actually look like a DSA.
Ass crack. Hey, Laura Ass crack. Is she a Justice Democrat?
Is she a corporate justice?
She is
person?
corporate. Is she a corporate justice Democrat? Is she a
What do
corporate?
you make of that? Like what
Jank didn't retweet my latest show at the Yuck Yuck Factory.
Carolyn Maloney is there. Again, good person to be pressuring.
Laura Ash Crack. Watch your mouth, Sam.
Oh my God,
it's a pretty good one.
But
seriously, I will not have anybody on from Justice Democrats. I hate them.
Bunch of sellouts.
It's just so weird.
They're a bunch of sellouts, and it's very hard to deliver my signature line in the new YouTube era.
Well, I mean, their whole philosophy is everything he said isn't possible. Of course he's going to be salty about them.
What's that? Oh, right. Yes. No, he hates the Reformation Project because every day it shows him to be full of it.
Laura Ash Crack. Little thing called comedy. Little thing called timing.
Yeah, there you go.
So I say vote third party, no matter what, no matter where you are. I don't care if you're in a swing state.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, it's better than being a sellout. I think if we vote for Jill Stein, we could support Elizabeth Warren next time.
Let's play his Killer Mike thing.
He's amazing. He's so good. Killer Mike is so good.
This is fresh off the heels of Bill Maher saying just wackadoodle stuff about BDS. He really has a problem with religion. If it's a religion that starts with an I and ends with an M.
Right.
Here's Killer Mike on Bill Maher's program, explaining to people why the concept of free college, of a free college option in every state, is actually good for society.
Mike, what did you think of Cardi B's summit with Bernie Sanders?
Man,
I was
week's
pay to
so
be in that
encouraged
room.
because this is
Really?
a country that this is a country of vagrants, unwanteds, and protesters. In our inception, right? We're essentially the hood of the United Kingdom. And
no, that's Australia.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Australia would be
Botany
La Ghetto. But Cardi represents a young Afro-Latina woman from poor and working class background who has now used her platform when she could have become far more conservative, made her money and walked away. She used it to engage not only for her own self-interest, but the self-interest on behalf of her people. She's now probably in a 35 to 45% tax bracket. And she said, I don't mind paying my money. I just would like my money to go other places besides military. I'd like it to go in education. And I think that's what my grandparents wanted when they moved from the Deep South. That's what your parents want. So for me, seeing her participate in it invigorates me because I know other young women, 18, 19, 21 years old, who may not be going to college for 4 and 6 year degrees, but maybe going to beauty school, maybe working menial jobs. It makes them active.
Well, that's an interesting point then, because Bernie, who you support,
yes,
okay, he's for free college. Yes. I've raised this point before. Why should people who don't go to college be subsidizing the ones who do? Because the people who go to college are going to be making a lot more money. College is not free. Somebody's going to be paying for that.
Pause it for 1 second. Now, I don't know this for a fact, but I am willing to bet that Bill Maher has never complained about the mortgage interest deduction that applies only to people who own their homes, as opposed to people who rent. Like, why should renters, non-owners of homes, subsidize people who own homes? There's arguments. We've certainly made those. Maybe up to a point, it's even justified. But I can't imagine that Bill Maher has ever made that argument. I wonder if Bill Maher's ever made the argument, why do we have people who don't have children? Why do you have to pay property taxes to go to schools? Why do we get to do that? Or why do we have to have people mandated insurance where people have to subsidize, I don't know, guys our age getting colonoscopies?
But I smoke pot and I like Obama.
Maher, per his Wikipedia, says he paid for his Cornell days by selling pot. So
but here's the point, is that this common sense argument is only deployed in very specific and narrow instances, which tells you all you need to know about the person who's deploying this argument.
For free college. I've raised this point before. Why should people who don't go to college be subsidizing the ones who do? Because the people who go to college are going to be making a lot more money. College is not free. Somebody's going to be paying for that college. I don't understand why the people who get the benefit of it shouldn't be paying for it.
College and trade school. And this is from a dad who has had children who went to both. My oldest son went to Omnitech Trade and learned computer engineering and things of that nature and sound engineering. My daughter did 2 years. She did the same 2 years twice on me in Savannah State. 21 grand. I love her. That's my baby.
Really sticks in your mind there, doesn't it?
But yeah, I know. Right? But he offered college and trade school. Part of being an American is being a steward for the next generation of Americans. My grandparents worked in fields. My grandmother went to college. My grandfather toiled on a blue-collar job so that my sisters and I could then have post-secondary education. I don't mind, as an American now, investing in the greater America. If we're going to build an infrastructure, you got to have carpenters and electricians. If that's one of your children, that's fine by me.
Okay. Did you notice I love that. I'm physically absorbing the stupid.
Oh no, he was getting
disingenuous-
ready. He's getting ready. He's getting ready for it.
I've heard this so many times I can dance to it.
Right, but I mean, just this concept. I mean, you get an interest deduction on your mortgage. Just want you to contemplate this. You're going to sell that house, in many instances, at a profit. It's completely, not only is your living subsidized, but your profit making is subsidized. He will never complain about that. Now, maybe there's an argument that home ownership is good. It creates stability in neighborhoods, gives people, a skin in the game, and they're going to make sure their homes are safer and this and that. And I think that's arguably a good argument. Maybe we want to encourage home ownership. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. The point is, how can you complain about the concept of one public higher education opportunity in each state, and not complain about the mortgage introduction tax, which would cover it 1,000,000 times over? I don't mean that's a slight exaggeration, but well, it's because of what you think society should do and should value. That's it.
And it's so beautiful the way he threaded. It's like, no, it covers trade school as well. And in fact, we should respect and prop up and highly compensate people in trade school. I understand the whole structure of the argument is ridiculous.
It should cover trade school, of course.
Yeah.
But even if it didn't,
the argument doesn't
argue
stand.
on the merits. Is there value to having the opportunity for future generations of Americans to get involved in careers that are not dictated by hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt when they start day one in the workforce? Is it a value of Americans to have people who can go out and make that money and not be chained to this kind of debt? That's the question. It's absurd. It's an absurd. Why do we have public school? Why do we have public school at all? Why should people who send their kids to private school have to pay for public education in schools?
I do think that actually points to a bigger project that like somehow higher ed needs to become more inclusive and not just basically like a way for late teenagers to jump a class rung, basically. Like I don't know how exactly. We've talked a little bit about this on TMBS. Like making it more like, say, like any 35-year-old has like a number of free credits that they can go to a university and take every like such and such years or something like that.
Right, that it's not so sequestered as a
not as isolated from the society. Yeah, and that there's just more of a broader concept and investment that people at different times in their life for a variety of different reasons, not just professional advancement, should be able to take a course, read books, have conversations.
So meanwhile, the New York Times has come out with, they have a project. They're rolling it out. There's going to be more in the future, but I guess they've come out with like a big spread in the New York Times Magazine, and it's basically looking at, and I haven't had a chance to read any of it yet, but it sounds fascinating, and to a certain extent, like we mentioned on the in the discussion about meat and the role it played in the development of the United States, et cetera, and vice versa. We've had multiple interviews with people about cotton. There was 2 or 3 books, I think, that we covered it. And it's fascinating, the development that cotton, and when you say cotton, you are also saying slavery, because cotton became such a huge commodity because labor costs, a highly labor-intensive process, was free, more or less, for the development. And it had huge implications. Well, apparently there's stories like this about slavery in terms of the way that it impacts all sorts of different things. I think I would be surprised if you didn't see it shape housing policy, not just housing policy shaping certain things. It shaped the way that we do the Supreme Court. It shaped the way that states organized in terms of voting rights, et cetera, all sorts of different things.
Actuarial stuff.
Jim Crow era. I mean, slavery impacts everything, and it continues to this day. Which, if you really look at how the implications of events 200 or 300 years ago impact all sorts of other things, it shouldn't be a surprise. But apparently, examining slavery for the right in this country it's like a bloodletting. I mean, you've got conservatives freaking out freaking out right now. Like, how come? It's one thing to talk about slavery, but why does race have to come into it? Can you imagine saying that and being a sentient human being? Sentient human being? There was one guy who I saw on Twitter who said something to the effect like, well, slavery is not unique to America.
That is a solid.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Here's
right
Newt
there.
Gingrich, New York Times, 1619. 1619, of course, was the arrival of the first slaves in the country. 1619 Project should make its slogan, all the propaganda we want to brainwash you with is a repudiation of the original New York Times motto. Like, why this deep investigation into slavery is so threatening to them? Contrary to its stated goals, says Benjamin Weingarten, he's some, I think, Cato guy maybe, it appears to be the purpose of the 1619 Project to delegitimize America and further divide and demoralize its citizenry. Like, what does that even mean, delegitimize America? Do we get our country stamp revoked?
Like, does it delegitimize it to say it was built on slave labor?
Like, what? Honestly, like, what does that even mean? What does it even mean? I don't even know what that means. All right. But here is Jesse Waters popping off with his version of this from Fox News.
A new expose by the New York Times says that your lawn is not only contributing to pollution and climate change, but it's also racist. The piece saying, quote, these lawns come on the backs of slaves. It's grueling, endless work. By the 1870s, we also see American culture slowly start to embrace lawns for the privileged masses. So I guess when my dad made me mow his lawn, I was his slave.
Oh my God.
Exactly.
It's
that's
sort of
really
stunning.
the point.
Like, that's their news. They'll take one quote from this massive thing about lawns.
Your lawn is racist? The New York Times is crazy.
I am sure there is a story behind that. I mean, I do remember like those lawn jockey things. Do you guys, are you old enough to remember those?
I've seen those.
Yeah.
They're in books. Those are highly
Well, no, I saw
racialized.
them on lawns when I was a kid.
They still had those in lawns when you were a
Oh,
kid?
in the 70s?
I'd only
Sure.
seen white
Jesus.
ones. I didn't know they did like Sambo versions.
Oh,
of it.
yes.
Yeah, that's the
Oh, my God.
So in
yeah.
Worcester, you would see, Jesus, that's wild.
Oh, yeah.
Jesus, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess lawns do got some racialism to them.
Oh my God.
Yep. I remember those
No
as a
problem
kid.
there.
Let's ask Jesse Waters what he thinks about this. Jeez.
Oh my God, he can't take jokes anymore.
God, we can't even have lawn jockeys anymore. I mean, it's so telling, though, isn't it, that they would be this nervous about an exploration of slavery?
Well, they don't want, and again, it's not even just like the moral dimensions of it, because they just don't want a historical understanding of anything. I mean, particularly slavery and race, but really anything. I mean, you just look at their go-to, like, look at how the whole war on terrorism in Islam was always covered, right? It's evil. It's a magical comic book story. It's not a history. That's their core.
It's crazy.
Historicize, don't mythologize. That's the leftist project.
This is why Brett Weinstein and IDW people are so against these sorts of studies in universities.
Oh, so is this Quillette?
This is a while back about something.
I wish serious academics would realize that when the public backlash comes, and it will come, the defunding will be blunt and indiscriminate. If you don't clean house now, my point when we pass it. And then he goes, this is exactly right. The need to clean house is obvious, and it's grown. Ignoring it, I don't understand what this is reference to.
It's basically about we want to clean house on basically gender studies departments.
Right. Just we need all this info
before the backlash comes.
It's contrary to common sense.
That Quillette certainly isn't trying to stoke.
Quillette
Bernie
has
Sanders.
really high editorial
Bernie
standards,
Sanders just sent pizzas to the coal miners. They're still blocking those trains in Kentucky, and in Belfast. Apparently,
Maine.
you missed this.
Oh, what
no,
happened?
Belfast, Ireland. Apparently, the big the shipyard that built the Titanic.
It's on strike.
Well, I think it's closing, and a bunch of shipyard workers have occupied it and demanding the government turn it into a renewable energy, some type of renewable energy plant or something to that effect.
That is
So
awesome.
they can get retraining.
Yeah, actually, and I mean, there's a new piece in Politico that just dropped, basically emphasizing again the way Sanders is using his email list to really just prop labor campaigns across the country.
We'll
So
see.
that's
I hope it's a
yeah.
good. I mean, it's definitely a good movement building. We'll see if it's a good campaign strategy. Colin,
yeah.
I mean, who knows?
Who knows? But I mean, my instinct has to be that at the very least, for getting the people with like serious engagement to knock on doors, make contributions, and do those sort of things, I think it would be.
If the strike was happening in New Hampshire or Iowa or South Carolina, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I mean, I'm very happy he's doing it.
Broader
I think it's great.
capacity building so that you can be more easily say, like, well, can you now take those skills to come spend a couple of weeks in Iowa and New Hampshire
We'll
organizing it? Yeah, we'll see.
Calling from a 518 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Gabe from Iowa.
Gabe from Iowa. What's on your mind?
So I was just, we've been talking, you guys have been talking a lot lately about the sort of predictability of violence coming from the right, given their rhetoric on things like the invasion and immigration more broadly, right? And I'm wondering about what's your take on Willem Van Spronsen, who was the guy who, was sort of firebombing and I guess had some guns at the ICE facility in Washington. Because it seems to me that when in not just rhetoric, but reality, we have a terrorist organization, ICE, violently targeting people and people driving trucks through protests and whatnot. We need to start thinking about, or like, just what's your take on that sort of direct action? Obviously not endorsing violence or whatever, but like,
yeah, no, I think it's wrong. I mean, I think it's wrong. I mean, I can tell you this, that like, I don't think in any situation where people can get hurt is legit at this point. I don't know if there's ever a point where it is. I mean, I imagine, it's hard for me to imagine in our society at this time there ever being something that it's legit in terms of like of doing anything like that type of violent act. I think there comes a time where like, graffiti or, targeted vandalism down the road. I think there are instances where that may be, legit. I don't know if we're there yet, frankly. I don't think we are. I think there needs to be mass protest. And I think, look, it's more.
How would we know when we get there?
Well, I don't know. But there'd have to be a lot of other things exhausted before then. So instead of like this guy expending effort on getting guns and building fire bombs, far better to go out and organize people and get people, because I mean, look at the value, frankly, between what those people locking arms and sitting in front of that gate did and exposing that driver for being the type of person who would do what they do to immigrants versus what that guy who, armored up and, buffed up and went and tried to attack it. I mean, look at the relative value of those in terms of the argument. Far more valuable to be doing peaceful protests. It just is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, I guess it's just sort of the relative value, I think, has yet to be seen of that other than exposing this one guy. But I think obviously individually, someone doing something like that is obviously worthless and it's horrible PR. But, I would be lying if I didn't have some sort of sympathy. And also, like when people were talking about storming Area 51, there were all these memes going around on the left meme pages about we should just do this except for ICE facilities. And I would be lying if I didn't think maybe not the worst idea I've ever heard in my life.
I don't know. I think once you do that, then you're basically opening the door to things like people firebombing Planned Parenthood clinics.
Well, and also massive state repression. I just think I want to just disaggregate. On the level of what you might sympathize with and the moral feeling, I'm with you 100%. But if you look even historically at situations where there were actual historical conditions that kind of fit more of armed struggle politics, those tactics still basically faded away, right? I'm talking South Africa, Northern Ireland, which are much more actual examples of this. And I think a
lot of people were. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
If you did that, there would be a massive repression of state apparatus that would just be completely overwhelming. And I mean, if anything, frankly, there's already legislation on the books in states that are criminalizing nonviolent protest and nonviolent interference and things like that. I mean, that was the thing that happened during Standing Rock. They tried to basically make it legal to do what that guy did, namely run protesters over.
Right. So I guess that to me sort of sounds like the mass state repression is currently unfolding, right?
It would take on
might be a reaction
completely,
in the future.
Yeah,
it would take on a totally different scale when you open that door.
It's people that want to be given a reason,
and there's still enough space right now, in as degraded as it is, but there's still a certain degree of openness in the institutions and civic space. If you did that, that would be shut, and that is why I think people it's tangential, but I'm not at all supportive of that new FBI briefing on conspiracy theories. I think that even things like that are a very disturbing creep on overall civil liberties. But if you gave them that opportunity, they would run. They're already running a truck through it. They would just cut it out completely, in my view.
Appreciate the call.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Calling from a 651 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 651. 651. Going once. Going twice. Sold. Next up, 734. Calling from a 734 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Sam. This is Jack from Michigan. How are you?
Good. Jack from Michigan. What's on your mind?
So, when it comes to the Larry Kudlow thing, so when he was saying that, they were showing the thing there that on the shy run from Fox about consumer spending was going up, but stock market wasn't doing that well. Altogether, I was just having a hard time understanding what he was saying.
Well, I mean, because he was wasted, Jack, and he was also fibbing.
You want a sip, Jack from Michigan?
But we shared your disbelief, and that's why we played the clip.
Jack from Michigan.
Appreciate
nothing wrong with a little optimism.
Stay blue.
A little glass of
stay gold. What? Stay gold.
Hey, with me, the glass is always half full, baby.
Stay gold, pony boy.
And when it's half empty, then you make it full again with more.
The amber optimism.
Optimism of it's like the fall foliage in a glass.
I'll take my optimism neat, please.
Oh gosh. Here's Pete Buttigieg. Basically doing the Republicans' work for him It is quite clear that what's going to happen the day a Democrat gets elected to president, we will hear of the unsustainable debt and deficit that has accumulated, and we need to cut programs immediately. You could raise taxes, but if we are headed to an economic downturn, except for on a very narrow set of people, you don't want to necessarily do that. Here is Pete Buttigieg basically staking out, the common sense. This is what Nancy Pelosi was pushing, basically, pay-go, right? It's another way of saying that, like, look, I have a very progressive agenda, but we just cannot implement it right now.
I think, much more concerned about the debt than what is fashionable among most people in my party. And it's largely generational because, Lord willing, I'm going to be here when a lot of these fiscal time bombs that have been set by leaders in both parties, but especially under this president, go off. And it used to be that the tug of war was between Democrats who favored more deficit spending and Republicans who wanted to do something about the debt. And then the Republicans took charge and revealed that they don't actually care because they blew a giant hole in the deficit. And so the very same deficits that were being used as an excuse when we were told we couldn't expand programming for education or invest in our infrastructure or deliver health care to more Americans became something not to worry about when it was time to pass a giant tax cut for corporations.
What's amazing about this clip is that he recognizes how it's been used in the past, and then he uses more of their like, what is the fiscal time bombs that he's talking about? What time bomb we have? At one point, something's going to explode and blow everything up. What is that? What exactly is he talking about?
Can't really elaborate, but I'm young. As you can tell,
Seb,
other candidates.
believe me, you'll be dead by the time you understand.
Dead.
So,
but one day it's going to happen. You'll likely be dead. I'll be alive, God willing.
As far as
if I keep eating my veggies.
As far as different types of disasters that might happen if we don't take action today,
right.
The debt is not really up there.
Isn't that incredible that we have like a media and political culture where there is. Okay, there's an ongoing issue which no one ever talks about, which is nukes, which could cancel the world at any moment. And then there is the acceleration of an ecological crisis. All of that doom and gloom rhetoric could apply to both. And then it's done to something that, like, worst case, you could just say, like, oh, I guess we just need to bump taxes up on rich people and plug a few holes. No problem. No mistake, though. No surprise that he cleans up in those donor lists. He has the wealthiest zip codes in the country.
See, what is this, Brendan?
Greetings from the Hamptons, where Pete Buttigieg is winning the Monogram Shops Cup count race, the results of which have been proven right in every election except 2016. Owner Valerie. Holy cow! I wonder if this is where I didn't get it from
the Jeb Cups?
The Jeb Cups were somewhere out on Long Island.
Jeb, your cups are in Long Island.
Wait, where's Sanders?
Give Mama a
You
shot.
think anyone's buying Sanders cups? Who
No
has a
one's
house
buying
in
Sanders
the Hamptons?
cups out there.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah.
That's unbelievable.
They're terrible people. They don't support Bernie Sanders. They're bad people, folks.
Wow, that's amazing.
These are bad people.
That's amazing.
Look at all the Trump cups too.
Of course, they're Trump cups.
Yeah, of course.
Oh,
I mean, this is actually a micro version of just like another reason to vote for Bernie is the anti-endorsement Wall Street list. This is a homespun version of that.
Oh, don't get all huffy about the Monogram cup shop.
Hey, I'd love to.
Michael,
I love going out to the Hamptons. I'm
There's
not
nothing
huffy
like
at all. I'm just saying. it is what it
Monogram
is.
cup shop. Oh, I can't. I've gone out to Montauk and I actually enjoy that, but that's off season.
The actual water is nice, but the scene is not.
Stuck between Buttigieg and Trump supporters?
Yes. I mean, literally.
So Bernie Sanders came out with a massive criminal justice reform bill. It's a 6,000-word proposal. It includes banning cash bail, solitary confinement, and civil asset torture. It calls for legalization of marijuana, abolishing the death penalty. It would create legal, safe injection sites where people can use illegal drugs under medical supervision. It requires the Attorney General to investigate every time a person is killed in police custody. We don't even have stats. There's no entity in the country that keeps stats other than a couple of journalists have done it. Do you understand there's no official count of how many people die in police custody in the country?
Seems like a good metric to keep an eye on.
That seems like an early start. It would establish a prisoner bill of rights, create a civilian corps of unarmed first responders to deal with mental health emergencies, and boost funding for public defenders. That is pretty comprehensive. Ends the 3 strike laws, which are horrible. Expand use of sentencing alternatives. Ends mandatory sentencing minimums. And here is how they will deal with this on Fox News.
His campaign, Andy, says that all of this is designed to root out institutional racism and corporate profiteering. What do you think of his plan?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's a funny thing. I worked in the justice system for a long time. I think it's maybe the least racist system that we have in the country, if that's possible. You know, we're a country that's done a lot to try to root out.
I love it, if that's possible. There's so many completely non-racist institutions in this country that it would be hard to find one that is less, but it's less.
It's like he stopped himself from implying that America's surrounded, like, afloat in racist systems.
He's like, right. Yeah, at least we hire him.
Do we know who this Andy McCarthy is? What did this guy used to do? Former U.S. attorney? In what district? I'm fascinated by where this guy could actually... There he goes. SDNY. We only dealt with Wall Street. We didn't care what color you were when you worked on Wall Street. We were still going to go after you.
You could be of any background, and we'd let you plea out.
Yeah, policing industries that are structurally white.
Right, exactly.
You could be Italian, Irish, Jewish.
I remember the honor that I had when, in my first 20 years of prosecuting Wall Street, I let my first black executive off for insider trading.
It's maybe the least racist system that we have in the country, if that's possible. You know, we're a country that's done a lot to try to root out racism because of our prior
history. Yeah, you'll recall that part of those moves to root out racism would be things like pre-clearance for voting and whatnot that we got rid of. Here we go. We got a little bit more here.
It's maybe the least racist system that we have in the country, if that's possible. You know, we're a country that's done a lot to try to root out racism because of our prior history of it. But, you know, if you've been in the criminal justice system, it's dominated for the most part by judges and lawyers who are products of left-leaning educational institutions who don't have, you know, there's a lot of things you can say about them, but the idea that they're racist is absurd. And the idea that they would be presiding over a system that was endemically racist is equally absurd. The fact of the matter is we have a lower prison population, and particularly a federal prison population, than we've had in years. And most of the provisions that he wants to take out, such as, for example, mandatory minimums, in the 60s and 70s when we had, you know, tremendous crime in this country, we didn't have mandatory minimum provisions, and it was judges who determined sentences unilaterally.
This guy is going to argue that mandatory minimums, you got to be kidding.
Gets to weigh in on what the sentences should be for serious crimes.
It takes out the
through
bias,
their representatives in Congress. Yeah. If you repeal them, then it's not the public that decides what the sentence has to be, it's the judges. And the judges, institutionally, academically, by way of background, tend to be much more left-leaning and much more insulated from the communities where there is high crime than average Americans do.
Pause it. I mean, this is stunning. First of all, he's saying you want to take the sentencing out of the judge's hands so that they cannot contemplate or even look at like, hey, wait a second. How come I look at sociological studies that say whites and blacks smoke pot at the same rate, but 80% of the people who show up in front of me are black? It's because the cops are bringing in more black people for the same crimes that white people are not brought in for. The judge has no latitude, and they get the sentencing. I mean, it's so disingenuous. Stunning. Well, typical. But Bernie's proposal, very, very robust.
This guy was previously smearing Jamal Khashoggi as a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. So.
Oh.
For the National Review.
There you go.
A National Review guy.
Is this that Andrew McCarthy?
Yeah,
Yep.
You can't forget his
that guy was
2010
Jesus.
book, How Obama Embraces Islam's Sharia Agenda.
Well, that's true, too.
He did a good job on that, but he should have talked about no one ever talks about the black unemployment rate.
What about China?
But if you said to Bernie, you want to do that, but we've got we got more Puerto Ricans owning bars than they did before. I know it. I'm there. And I said, hola, give me some optimism.
Here's what I got for optimism. It's like eating at a Chinese buffet. So you eat all the optimism you can want, and then a half hour later, you're like, I'm still hungry for
I
something.
still want the optimism. But you know what? They said it was an all-you-can-eat, and so I didn't stop. It was a fiduciary contract. They didn't even shake hands. I still ate it, and it was good.
Mai Tai. That's a funny word.
Mai Tai.
Mai Tai.
Is that a massage or a
this
drink?
guy, I like a drink.
Maybe I could go both. Mai Tai.
Oh, yeah, I hope he's
I have some Mai Tai. Have all the Mai Tai you have.
Time for another vacation.
All right. Here's Ainsley Ann Earhart on Fox.
Ainsley.
She's on the small business beat.
Chicken
As you
salad
know,
emporium.
she has friends who have a chicken salad emporium that are very worried about the rise in the minimum wage. And here is a woman who is closing her business because there's too many homeless people.
Relocating her business.
Relocating.
Tell us about the issue. You described some of the disgusting things that you have to clean up when you get to work every morning. Go into detail about that and why you actually decided to move your business.
Well, when I come into work, I'm never sure what I'm going to walk into. I've been broken into. I've had my glass broken. I clean up human excrement off of my doorstep every week, cups of urine, things like that. And I do have compassion for these people, but they're sleeping in front of your door and they're leaving trash and they're turning over garbage cans, and I can't do that anymore.
Yeah, we showed some video of what you have to clean up in your business when it was broken into. I was at dinner with some friends from California the other day, and I said, is this all hype? Is it really as bad as everyone's talking about, since I live on the East Coast? And she said, absolutely, it is so bad. We have got to fix this problem. If you look at some of the stats, it shows how big of a problem this is. Homelessness is up 19% since 2017. More than 5,500 people are living on the streets. And this is the stat that really shocked me. In California, you guys have 1/4 of the nation's homeless population living in California. At least last year in January of 2018, those numbers were released. That's incredible. 1/4 of our homeless population lives where you guys are.
Yeah.
What's
I
your
believe it.
reaction? Is it really as bad as the media is saying it is?
It is as bad, and it's definitely a lot of people want to say it's a housing issue, but it's a drug issue. It's a drug issue.
And what is the governor doing to combat that drug issue? I mean, I'm hearing he wants to offer safe spaces where you can go and shoot up now.
Absolutely. I've spoken with a lot of law enforcement in my area, and they all have the same answers. Their hands are tied. They can't arrest them. And a lot of people think that arresting them won't do much, but it definitely will.
Wow.
Man, there still is Orange County psychopathy left in Cali. Jesus.
I was waiting.
What
I mean,
an
look,
evil lady.
There is definitely a problem there, and it's
It's
very
a
difficult.
massive problem. Can we? Part of it, though. I mean, it's not the overall problem, but part of it's kind of obvious why a lot of homeless people would go to California, right?
You mean as opposed to Minnesota?
Yeah, right. Isn't maybe we could do a little deductive reasoning
Well,
here?
of course. But the solution would be to actually do programs to help people not be homeless anymore.
Oh,
It's
Sam
not
Cedar,
housing.
you bleeding heart.
It's not housing's not the issue. Drugs are the issue. But making a safe space for people to have drugs and getting them to basically become more functional in the context of society would be a problem.
Well, that solves
the key
the
is
other
arrest
problem.
them on vagrancy charges. And then what happens? Like, we were supposed to put them in there for life?
I mean,
like what is the logic?
That's the implication. And also the point of the injection sites is not, I mean, they do need to do things about homelessness, but the point of the injection sites is to stop the spread of disease.
Right.
Which is like,
right.
I mean, maybe she's has the position of like the general in that
Well,
old
but you also,
Soderbergh movie
but
who's
it's not
like,
just,
the
it's not
junkies
just disease.
solve their
you
own
also
problems.
then end up developing one-to-one contact with people. You can get them into programs. You get them into help.
Yeah, but the ladies are scared, Sam. She's got a shop and the homeless guy's there. Sam Cedar.
Here is on the IM's HW lit. I live in California and study policing. Homelessness is caused by urban redevelopment, gentrification, and policing. You need to provide safe, affordable housing for people. If there are drug problems, you need to provide support for them. There's just, I love the idea that you can just arrest these people and then.
It's clearly a housing problem, and not only like do we need to build more houses for like public housing, but it's also there are vacant houses enough to put every homeless person in. It's a resource distribution issue.
Gregory from Oklahoma. My first day back at college was great. I had friends who had known me since our first year of college back in 2016 said that I looked good and I noticed I lost weight. Great day, y'all. Glad to hear it, Gregory. Keep us updated. Contagious chameleon. Yet another reason to elect Bernie Sanders. When the Republicans are attacking debt, Stephanie Kelton may likely be Treasury Secretary. Water boat from Kashmir. In Kashmir, 6,000 people detained in the last week under the so-called Public Safety Act, where you could be detained for 2 years without charge. They've done this before, but not at the rate of 1,000 people per day. What I've realized in the silence in the international community is that only weak countries are threatened with sanctions, and strong countries get their situation monitored. People wonder why oppressed people pick up guns. Alisi, with Mila doing some work around the office, it appears Sam supports nepotism and child labor. Looks like he is running for the Libertarian Party nomination after all. Tomcat. Hi, guys. I got to think that considering what Matt is doing with Literary Hangover, George Orwell's sitting defeated on the other side saying, well, that's it. I've been canceled. Like Krusty did that one time.
Yep, that's very much the time.
Dr. Chaos MD, we should absolutely have tuition free as well paid for books, housing, and food for any person looking to enlighten themselves a higher education, whether it's university or trade school. It amazes me how people, boomers especially, think this is a bad idea. Our media institutions are a big part of the problem, seeming to focus entirely on the argument against education. The other day, I drove my girlfriend's car and had the opportunity to listen to a total trash interview on NPR. Ooh. Where the interview uncritically allowed her guest, a professor from George Mason,
dun, dun, dun,
speak about defunding the education system because most Americans don't remember what they learned in school. Jesus.
They don't remember. They can't retain it.
I'm happy now. Kudlow may have suffered a stroke. Lots of people slur more as they get older. The pollster is Rachel Bitkofer. Her model doesn't look so good for Bernie. Also, check out The Family about C Street on Netflix after you watch Mindhunter, which is very excellent. It is very possible that Kudlow had a stroke, but it is not the case.
I had it.
I mean, he could have had a stroke in between those hits, it's also possible that something else happened.
You know the worst part of having a stroke is? You can't drink.
Bronze
Where's my drink? I would watch, I don't know quality-wise how good it is, but Sacred Games on Netflix.
It's long.
Because it sets the understanding of the government that's in power in India right now, and I think that doorway into sort of Hindu nationalist ideas is important. And it's a good gangster show.
Call from an 805 area code. Who's this? Where you calling from? 805. 805. Bye. Let's try that. 651 again. 651. Bye. Now, this is not updating how long people have been online for. I don't know what's going on with that. Now I've got an error. Bear with me, folks. Little technical complications. We'll wait for that to load back up. Here we go. All right, we've had people who've been on hold for over an hour. Calling from a 562 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Yes?
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, I just wanted to call concerning something about my community specifically. I just moved to El Paso in the last 2 weeks.
Okay, and what's your name?
My name is Alan.
What's your comment? Obviously, the timing of you moving there, I imagine, was a fairly intense period of time.
Yes, exactly. I guess my main concern is a lot of people assume that people in the Latino community, especially with the whole, a lot of right-wingers say that illegal immigrants are voting and changing elections and all that stuff. And I find that in my experience, at least, a lot of Latinos are kind of apathetic as to the politics, even in like local stuff, even in like really serious stuff like the El Paso shooting, that type of thing. I was just wondering your idea on how we can address that, how you think maybe we could get this community like more involved. I wish they were as involved as the right wingers say.
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously, all the immigrant, undocumented immigrants voting over and over again is a lie. But it's also the case that the data show that the Latino community does not vote in numbers consistent with just about every other community. I've heard a bunch of different theories as to why. That part of it is a function of coming from societies where their vote really has proven time and time again not to matter, because they elect someone who's good, and then there's intervention from outside and things revert. That in some of these countries now, any type of involvement with politics in any fashion puts a target on your back, literally.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what it would take. I mean, it's frankly, it's a big mystery. And I don't know that anybody has figured it out yet. I think, Democrats always hope that the Latino community is going to come out in big numbers, even though, the support amongst Latinos for Democrats is probably 60-40, I think, broadly speaking, across the country, which is not nearly as dramatic as it is, let's say, for the black community. But the numbers are just not. They need to come out more in numbers. I mean, they could have an enormous power, but part of it may also be that they're somewhat conflicted, maybe more socially conservative in some respects, but who knows?
Yeah, at least here in Texas, I find that, even in my own family, a lot of people are, really for gun rights. We had the conversation about, limiting gun rights and stuff like that. And the first thing that I heard was people talking about, I think it was Arizona, how, you can't really mess with people because everyone has a gun in Arizona. They're like really loose about gun rights and stuff. And a lot of Latinos, at least here in Texas, part of the military. That's kind of their main source of income, their main jobs out here. So it's just kind of weird that a lot of people assume that so many Latinos are just liberals and just have those policies in mind. But I don't know. And in my personal experience, I've found that it's kind of the opposite almost.
Well, I mean, the data bears out some of that. The question becomes like, hey, the fact that an entire party is organizing itself around demonizing you, will that be enough to drive you to vote? And I don't mean that even facetiously. I mean, that is really the question.
But part of it too.
Appreciate the call.
And we recognize, this is one of the reasons though that I think having a more, broader and sophisticated discourse about particularly really any community, but particularly, I mean, like Latinos, like that's such a broad category,
right? Because you're dealing with many different cultures,
and particularly, I mean, there's political cultures like in Miami that are so far right, and so identified with like the extremes in places like Venezuela.
All right, we got time for one more call. This person has also been on hold for over an hour. You calling from a 760 area code. Rest of the callers, I'm sorry, we're not going to get to you today. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello, this is Amy from San Diego.
Hello, Amy from San Diego. What's in your mind?
So the interview with Joshua, I have to say, it made me think of Bob's Burgers.
Okay.
So one of Eugene's lines is, "It's a dead cow on a bun, but it's still really fun." And I just felt like that needed to be added to the conversation.
I'm sorry I didn't raise that. I'm on a silent strike right now about Bob's Burgers because I have not heard about the movie yet. If I'm in the movie,
I want to say that I have been tweeting at multiple people for you. Also, Michael, I've been adding you. I've been trying to say get them to write you a character. So I'm trying out here.
This is a great call.
I would say, Amy.
Amy, focus on new blood in the future.
I was going to say, you don't want to divide your resources in that way.
I think when you have a character, we've already seen it, we get it, you go blah, blah, blah. But I think the idea of innovation, something new, this is very smart.
Well, Sam plays more than one character. People need to realize this.
That's right.
There's many more characters. Harold, I think, as well.
Harold. I've played probably a dozen characters on that.
I have a proposal. A podcaster named Sam who gets food poisoning at the burger shop. I will expose you to my audience. Don't forget to subscribe to the AM News Note. Boom.
Bye, Amy.
Hello.
Hello.
I just wanted to say that it's kind of funny. I'm a vegetarian, but one of my favorite shows is about burgers. So I just like to say that I like my beef burgers digitally only.
There you go. All right. Appreciate the call. Bye, Amy. All right, folks. That's it for calls. Apologies if you were hanging on the line. There's a bunch of you who were hanging on for a long time. We're going to have a news day at least on Wednesday, maybe 2 days. Maybe we'll do 2 days because we go over different policies. We'll see. Kyle's wife, Bronze Plan. Hi, Sam. I think you mentioned a stat a while back where there's some significant portion of the 2015 Republicans without a college degree thought the Republican Party was to the left of Democrats. Do you call this stat or am I misremembering? This is from Identity Crisis, and it wasn't Republicans. 50% of white people, non-college educated white people, as of I think it was like 2008, thought the Republican Party was to the left of the Democratic Party on race. That's from Identity Crisis, that book. Kyle's wife, last week I heard you talking about universal pre-K, which is important, but kindergarten is always overlooked. It's not mandatory in certain states. I did not realize that, and it doesn't have to be free. That needs to be the bigger first step, in my opinion. Universal free full-day kindergarten. Also, the quality of kindergarten varies wildly from district to district. I didn't realize that about kindergarten, but I would go, yes, pre-K and K. It's a Conn College alum there. Ryan in Los Angeles, lawn jockeys. When I was a kid growing up in an affluent Los Angeles neighborhood, the school bus would go down the streets of privilege, and I would note all the houses with lawn jockeys because they were the ones we would hit first when the revolution comes.
Oh, nice.
Penny, for your thoughts. It seems like we need to be doing mass protest on a daily basis. How do we get something like that started? Look around. See your friends. Kindergarten cop. Wouldn't it be better strategy for Dems to call for accurate accounting of the Electoral College representatives in the House rather than the abolishment of the Electoral College? It seems that arguing for the abolishment of the Electoral College gives an easy argument to the GOP that Dems are attacking the Founding Fathers, whereas advocating for actual equality based on population is harder to argue with. We haven't allowed an elector or a rep since 1976, and we've added 100 million people since then. That's a good argument. I love Sarah Palin. Since the NYPD fired the dude that choked Eric Garner to death, I want to bring to everyone's attention a story that got no attention last month. Philip Brailsford, the officer who got criminally cleared but fired last year after shooting Daniel Shaver in a hotel, was quietly rehired so he could file for medical retirement and collect his $2,500 a month pension for the rest of his life. Jesus. The Zuck. Really enjoyed the meat discussion today. Big fan of meats and smoking meats. Bullprug.
It's a Zuckerberg reference.
Oh, my God. There was a house in my small northwest Wisconsin town that still had a lawn jockey in the 2000s. Rob, sorry if this has been covered before, but out of curiosity, how would you respond to criticisms of Medicare for All like, I don't want the next Republican administration in charge of my health care? Well, I mean...
They're called CEOs, and they already are.
Well, yeah, that's a good point, but here's how I would respond to it. With a proper statutory framework, they will not be able to mess with it. Donald Trump has had a very hard time with the ACA, and that was a real sort of patchwork plan where you needed all of these sort of like fixes for stuff. The ACA, I understand, is MacGyver, full-on MacGyver stuff. And a Medicare for All will be much cleaner regime, as it were. The DX Fool, hey, man cavers, the interview you did with Mondo Jones, the guy challenging Nita Lowey for the House in the district of south of Malcolm Nance's, he mentioned he graduated from Stanford. You know what other African-American from NYC also graduated from Stanford entering politics? Cory Booker. But he went on to a football scholarship, so he didn't have much of a resume while in college. Booker was third string and had to quit football due to an injury and got into social justice stuff late in the game per WAPO. All right, 3 more. The greatest gaslight. Sam related to the call earlier. I've seen some conservatives arguing their constant use of the emotionally charged word invasion is no different than some on the left saying that we are holding migrants in concentration camps. What's the best way to respond aside from pointing out that our terminology is definitionally accurate? Do they have a point about the connotation of both things that could be something that could inspire violence? No. There's nothing implicit in the existence of concentration camps that says that you have to go and attack them. An invasion is a call to arms. We can end concentration camps that our government sets up by public policy changes. An invasion is necessarily out of your hands. The only way to stop an invasion is to fight them. The missing link. Representative Ray Lujan, 4th-ranking Democrat, now endorses impeach Trump. One night, Russian lemonade stand. Some of the shipwrights occupying the Belfast yard to prevent its closure and demand it be nationalized to build renewable energy infrastructure cited AOC and the Green New Deal as inspiration. What a shame that AOC had to be canceled after she endorsed the winner of the Democratic Party for New York governor after Cynthia Nixon had lost. And the final I am of the day. Mark Monk, TV. I quit my terrible auto dealership job after finding out about a huge pay discrepancy. I'll be talking about the horrible way dealers trap and steal wages from you on my stream all week on Twitch until I find a new job. If anyone's interested, follow at twitch.tv, Mark Munky, Munky. And if you want to help, I take donations and subs also help. Sam, I did a poll and people want you to just grow a beard. All right, folks, see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid.